I had an interesting experience coming over here because, like all the speakers, we've had some really good information and support from Firefly to craft our talks well and all the rest. And it taken quite a bit of time to work through my talk and all the rest. And I used the time on the flight over to just go over my notes. And as I was reading it, I realized it was rubbish. So I've taken perhaps a slightly stupid approach of having an emergency rewrite. So this could be bumpy. Sorry about that. Okay. But the topic remains the same. And that is that you would heal a lot faster if your brain would stop lying to you. So what I'd like you to do is, if you have one of the mirrors that was handed out at the beginning, I'd like you to take a hold of it now and just have a look at your own eyes. Maybe some of you after last night don't really want to do that, but and what I want you to do is, without moving your head, I want you to look only into your right eye and then only into your left eye and go right, then left, right, then left. And as you're doing that, I want you to realize that you don't actually see your own eyes move, because your brain is lying to you. You know logically your eyes must be moving. Your brain is telling you they're not. And your brain does that to give you the impression that the world around you is nice and smooth and there's no jittery motion going on. So what happens is, when you move your eyes, your brain actually closes off your eyes and you are functionally blind. So you're functionally blind for about 15% of every day, which is a nice thought for the drive home, right? Okay. So what do you see in that time then? Because it's not blank. What you actually see is your brain's best guess of what's going on. And it bases that best guess on the history that it's collected in the previous moments. So in that gap, your brain fills it with an estimate. And this slide here is full of really boring information that got lost on the flight, okay? What we will move on to is some sensory input and how that works. And we're all familiar with the tendon tap, okay? And what that basically is it's a check to ensure that the communication between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system is intact and behaving well. And so when you tap that tendon, you stretch the muscle. And that muscle stretch elicits a response from the alpha motor neuron, and we get a gross response, we get a big muscle movement. And that tells us that those two systems are communicating well. And the alpha motor neuron takes care of the big gross motions that you do. The much smaller structure in the neurology, please don't fail on me, good, is the gamma motor neuron, and they work through the muscle spindles and the Golgi tendon apparatus in exactly the same way as the alpha. You can't test it with the tendon tap because the gammas are responsible for much finer movement. They're the neurons that keep you upright. So even when you're sitting here nodding off just now, those gammas are firing away, keeping you with a good posture and good muscle tone. And what happens is, when the alphas and the gammas compete with each other, we get what's called the gamma bias. So the gamma is firing away nicely, keeping you well toned, and that's being checked all the time by your central nervous system. That feedback coming to the central nervous system tells you everything's fine. So you've got good tone, you've got good function, and you've got good feedback loops going all the time. And that's great until you get injured. And when you injure yourself, this fusing motor system gets compromised. And the neurology that you start to send from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system and to the brain begins to have blanks. So what happens when we have a blank? Your brain does just exactly what it does with your eyes. It fills it in with a best guess. And the longer you have that injury, the longer you work with just best guess neurology. And that's a problem, because the more your brain gets used to a neurological pathway, the harder it is to change. So the longer the best guess neurology stays in place, the harder it is for you to get back to normalized, proper function. Let me show you just how difficult it is for you to undo your best guess neurology. Most of you probably think this is a chessboard. And the reason you think it's a chessboard is because your brain has seen this image, or one very similar to it, thousands and thousands of times previously. So you've already decided that's a chessboard. I can in fact tell you that square A is not black, and square B is not white. And you immediately think, this jock's come over here and he's trying to pull a fast one. That's just not happening, okay? In actual fact, they're both gray. And I can tell you're still not convinced, so I'm going to put some stripes on it. And you'll see that square A and square B are actually exactly the same shade as the stripes. Square A and square B are gray. So now that you know this, because you're all really smart, right? When we take these stripes away, of course you'll see that A and B are gray. No, you don't. Because your brain is biased, and your brain is lying to you. And it's absolutely convinced that its previous history, the history that it's rehearsed so many times, must be correct, no matter what you see in front of you. And that's a little bit of a problem when it comes to healing injury, because once you've got, especially with chronic injuries, you've got that best guess neurology well embedded, you're really going to struggle to undo that. Not as much as I struggle with a clicker, but okay. So again, you'll notice we skipped past a couple of slides there. That's because they also were boring, okay? This is just showing how you can retrain your neurology, but we're not going to go there, okay? But the reason I like to talk about the neurology is because my thing is manipulation. And the nice thing about manipulation is it does something very, very unique in that neurological sphere. In fact, it does three very unique things. The first of those is that it gives a very rapid and forceful stretch to the, this is jumping all over the place, we're doing well here. Okay. There are also two slides that weren't supposed to be lost on the trip, but apparently are. So the first thing that the manipulation does is it gives a very forceful stretch to the muscle, stretching the muscle spindle, sending a huge afferent stimulus of normal neurology, i.e. we take the joint through its normal range of motion, and we send a massive amount of stimulus to challenge that guess neurology. And that's why, if any of you have ever been to a chiropractor, you'll know that they bring you back regularly because they're looking at reinforcing that normal neurology, competing with the guess neurology. Apologies to the chiropractors in the room, but there is a joke that goes, how many chiropractors does it take to change a light bulb? Just the one, but it'll take 26 visits, okay? And this is why, because you're continually competing with that abnormal neurology, and you need to continually reinforce that new picture. But as the brain begins to accept that new picture, you can start to move on. That's not even my slide. Don't know what's happening there. Okay. But the most useful thing that the neurology does, that the manipulation does, is it combats what you talked about in your talk, the Meltzack-Wall gate control theory of pain. You see, when you touch a radiator, you do this when the radiator was much hotter than you thought it was. And the reason for that is that the gated channels in pain make sure that you cannot feel movement and pain at the same time, with some exceptions. So, for example, if you've woken up in the morning to discover you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you don't also want to know that you've got sore knees, okay? So when you've got a movement pathway going, you close down your pain pathways. And that's how you can tell that a Premiership footballer who's doing triple salcho's really isn't injured. Because if he's injured, he's going to stay really still. Because the two things are mutually exclusive. So the nice thing that manipulation does is it reduces your nociceptive responses to pain by increasing the immediate range of motion. And it does that on a neurological level. So on 3 levels, manipulation changes the neurology, takes out the blanks that injury has caused, and replaces them with your normal function. So for that reason, I would ask you to consider including manipulation in your podiatric toolbox. Thanks very much.